You ever heard of the chicken dance? It's like the old prank they used to. It's like the old dance you used to do, like at the gathering. Every time that chicken dance song comes on with a violin, you go, you clap, and you go squat like this. You probably get the picture here, but could you ever realize it's a prank? Well, that's what these people on Instagram did, and as you're about to see, an old tradition chicken dance could even be a self-harmless prank on Instagram. Take a look.
Everyone loves the chicken dance. And now it's blowing up social media with a hilarious new twist. Unsuspecting victims are lured into cutting a joyful rug on camera. They think they're dancing with their family and friends right behind them. But they're the only ones getting down. It's happening everywhere. At this auto repair shop, this school, and at this dental office in Arkansas, Christy Dalton became the unwitting target.
Everyone had watched it but Christy. We just told Christy, hey, it's going to say 3, 2, 1, and you got to dance like a chicken.
This guy thinks he's boogieing down with his kids. Not quite, Dad. Even Grandma's not safe. Long live the chicken dance.
Long live the chicken. I wouldn't even do a prank like this on this broadcast, and even if I would, we have some special guest co-anchors. Or even Rochelle with 100 recipes for whooping ass. I will slap the caps off your knees. I will knock you into last night. I will snap your name out the phone book and call my bell till I did. You ever heard of the berry Chantilly cake? Well, now it's returning to the Whole Foods. What is it? And why? Take a look.
People are obsessed with this cake, berry Chantilly, sold at Whole Foods.
It is like a hug.
The yummy dessert features layers of vanilla cake, fluffy cream frosting, and fresh berries. The cake can also be sold by the slice. But when this obsessed fan tried to buy one at her local Whole Foods, she got quite a shock.
I just received the worst news ever in my entire life. Whole Foods is discontinuing the berry chantilly cake that we all know and love.
The fresh berries have been replaced with jam. Say it isn't so.
I don't know what this is, but it's an imposter.
Chef Danielle Sepsi explains what this is all about.
Why would Whole Foods change the recipe?
They're cutting costs. Also, it's hard to ship something that has fresh fruit. It reduces the shelf life, so probably so that they could freeze it and get a longer shelf life out of it, they use jam instead.
Whole Foods is clearly listening. Due to feedback, we're bringing back single slices of the classic Chantilly cake customers know and love, the supermarket giant says. Sure enough, when we went to Whole Foods in New York City today, the slices with the fresh berries were back on the shelves. The people have spoken.
Cheers.
I love cake. And even then, we wouldn't even have the shanty cake on the broadcast, or even have Becky Bakes come on. Yeah, I knew you were going to ask for Becky Bakes to come on the broadcast, but I keep forgetting to have her come on. Maybe I'm just negligent. Remember on Thursday that we told, well, we're going to save that. I mean, most companies don't have to do that. Bob may be right here. Alright, take a look at this. A 10-year-old.
A car speeds by.
This 10-year-old drives a car over a grassy playground area. A 10-year-old.
A car speeds by, coming all too close for comfort to a young girl walking along the sidewalk headed towards the playground. This was the scene in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The jungle gym was packed with kids. As the car came plowing through the grass, the driver, a 10-year-old boy. Yes, police say a 10-year-old was behind the wheel. Thankfully, no one was hurt. He was later arrested. Police say this wasn't his first run-in with the law either. It was his third arrest, and he's a suspect in a dozen other cases. The district attorney's office has filed criminal charges against the boy, but prosecutors say if a court-appointed psychologist finds him incompetent to stand trial, and the judge agrees, the case must be dismissed or suspended, and the child released from custody. Police say the boy's family is cooperating. This is Inside Edition Digital.
Where did this kid learn to drive from? A video arcade? How'd you learn to drive? Video arcade? The guy just sitting there and go, vroom, vroom, vroom. Where'd you get your license from? A Wheaties box? A Wheaties box for weenies? Here's some common sense for you. You don't drive till you're 16. That's driving without a license. You can't take it in a fine for it. But you can't get arrested, but you can be fined. It's a question that everyone often asks. It's often the question that every color neighborhoods are asking. Why can't blacks and whites get along? As you can see right here, I'm dressed black and white for our Friday night special. We're talking about segregated neighborhoods who want to be racist and not allow blacks and whites to mix and live together in those neighborhoods. The question is often asked, why can't we live together? Stay with us. Red and blue, black and white. Red and blue mixes purple. Red and yellow makes orange. Blue and yellow makes green. Those are mixed colors. But what about black? What about black and white? Well, God created us who we are. We are created black. We are created black, white, black and white. God made us who we are. He loves us. But that's not what this special is about. Tonight we're going to take you to Illinois, to where blacks and whites don't want to live together. And often ask the question, why can't blacks and whites live together? When clearly it's us white people that lead the black neighborhoods because we're afraid that this is and the third can happen. Now let me say this one up front. We are not dealing with racism here. We're just looking at the facts from a different state. And it may happen in your neighborhood. And if you watch this story, then you can relate. Like, Black lives and all lives matter. It doesn't matter. It seems very important in our neighborhoods. They move in, neighbors move out. I mean, we told you the story about we showed you a story from Mike Betcher about a black neighborhood and a white neighborhood, to where it was all battled up in court. The white neighbors were racist while the black people suffered. If this is happening in your neighborhood, this is a special you ought to watch with everybody here. And believe me, if we can understand what's going on all over in the black communities and the white communities, then maybe then we can often ask ourselves, why can't we live together? And why can't we just get along and mix? We're not going back to the days of civil rights, and we're not being racist. I'm not being racist here. We're stating facts. And as we're about to show you, it might not just happen in Illinois, but in your city, and in your neighborhood, and in the suburbs of your city where you live in, or probably here in Texas. Here's Tom Brokaw.
When the Chicago suburb really began taking off in the 1970s, it was pretty much all white. But now Madison is struggling to deal with what sociologists call tipping from one color to another. At the moment, the village is about 50-50, black and white, but the trends are only one way. More blacks are moving in, more whites are moving out.
They haven't all left, but slowly but surely they are leaving.
By the way, the patio furniture does stay.
Oh, really?
Oh, good.
As whites leave, real estate agents working Madison bring black families, many of them from older neighborhoods of the inner city, looking for a home on a piece of land of their own. Julie and Wes Willis are attorneys. They're public defenders in Chicago. On the job, they work with white colleagues, and they thought in their new home they might for the first time have white neighbors.
We did see a few homes that were, when we were looking to buy for sale, that were white families, but they were moving out.
When you're looking at a house, you don't talk to the owner and say, you're moving, why are you moving? No owner's going to tell you, I'm moving because all these black people are coming here.
We're leaving to go back to where we were raised, and you know, the lady across the street said, we know what our son plays with now, or who, you know, what kind of person, and we don't know who's going to move in next, but it's kind of the way life is. There's a few other neighbors that are talking about moving. I'm not sure why, or what their reasons are, or where they're going.
No, we don't much like to talk about race, not in public. Everyone is afraid of being misunderstood. By the way, Walter Keller says the reason he wants to move his family back to Bismarck, North Dakota, has nothing to do with the black families who moved into his neighborhood. The Kellers say they get along fine with their neighbors. We heard that a lot in Chicago's changing south suburbs. It's not the people next door we're worried about. They're not a problem.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm Tommy's mom.
Tommy, you want to stay in?
Ken Washington moved to Madison after saving for 2 years for a down payment on his family's first home.
We just took one look at it. We knew that this was the house. Beautiful home, young home, barely 5 years old. I guess God blessed me with a home like this. He really has.
Ken Washington grew up in another world, only a half hour away on Chicago's South Side. Until the 1960s, this is where blacks were expected to live. They had very few other choices. It remains the community of the city's poorest residents.
It's quiet, peace and quiet. Able to sit outside and have the kids run out in the yard and play during the day and not worry too much about anything. In the last 2 years, there have only been 2 murders here. In the last 2 years. And that was in 1 year. There were no murders here last year. I think those are very nice odds concerning my children's sake.
Blacks feel safe and comfortable in Madison, but at the same time, whites seem to feel only growing anxiety. One real estate survey turned up what has become for the village government an alarming fact. For every one white family considering a home in Madison, 25 black families are looking.
We definitely would like to have more white home seekers look at the village. And not to say that we want blacks to stop looking at the village, we don't want that either. But we need all kind of people looking at the village, else we will not be diverse. That's just the bottom line. It does have to go before.
To do that, the village government is trying something unique and controversial. It is actively shopping for whites. The words are diversity and affirmative marketing. But the message is, white families, please come to Madison. The campaign includes ads in commuter train stations used by large numbers of whites. By going public, village leaders know they're taking a chance. In effect, they're advertising white flight. New white families may not come in. Those already living in Madison may be angered. Their village looks like a hard sell. Most of the whites who still live here are in the oldest part of town, where an Italian restaurant is a gathering place. Blacks rarely come here, but we created an integrated lunch with 4 longtime residents, 2 sales executives, a sociologist, and a village fireman.
We get a lot more questions put to us, especially when we go out in the community, you know, on calls, or even if we run into people from other fire departments at the hospital, because everybody reads the newspapers.
And what do they say to the other fire guys?
Well, they say, you know, I see Madison's looking for white people. It's in their comments. You know, it's like,
Good one.
I think it's wonderful. And we have applications, and we're willing to interview those good white people. It's funny to me. It really is. You know, we have affirmative action for white people, and I think it's time.
The old cliche, there goes the neighborhood, it's alive and well. Tell the earlier the better.
Henry Swan, an insurance company executive, was one of Madison's first black residents. Since he moved here 20 years ago, his subdivision has turned 90% black. But it's no ghetto.
If you drove through when there's nobody around, I would defy you to say who lives in the community. You wouldn't be able to tell. You wouldn't be able to tell.
They got money out here. It's not like poor black families moving in. That's not the case. I mean, when they're driving Porsches and Lincolns and everything else, and here I'm driving an '89 Buick. You know? I don't think a black family would want a house like I have. Because it's smaller, and blacks usually like big homes.
The biggest houses in Madison are in a development called Butterfield Place. Homes here can sell for up to $300,000. The village government had hoped that Butterfield Place would become a beautiful example of high-end integration. It didn't happen. Although it is home to some of the best educated, highest income black families in the Chicago suburbs, whites don't want to live here.
You resent the fact that the white homeowners, for the most part, moved out?
Do I resent that? No, I don't resent that. They made that choice. I personally don't care if they moved out.
Dr. Meyer.
No, I'm serious. I don't care if they move out.
Because they're making a statement about you when they move out, aren't they?
Well, whether this village accepts me living here, that's their problem. I can afford to live here. I can afford to pay my taxes. I can afford to do all those things for me and for my family. If they can't handle that, they've got to get the grip.
We cannot live segregated in our own individual little pockets if we're ever going to reach the potential that this country was created for.
Dale Graham is a village trustee and a strong supporter of Madison's affirmative marketing. Although Graham tries to talk white residents out of moving, on his own block, there are only 3 white families left.
We have got to maintain the base of white residents, because if we don't stem the white flight, no matter what we do in regard to affirmative action, we're still going to fail.
We had people say, well, we're sticking it out. You know, what's that supposed to mean? You know?
Paul Fingston didn't stick it out. He moved from Madison 20 miles farther out into the cornfields. All white subdivisions are booming out here, all around the farm town of Manhattan, Illinois.
I don't regret my decision at this point. I still feel, and now being here 2 years and seeing my kids, I think I made the right decision at the time.
Manhattan has always been probably 99% white. It's just easy living. It's a good place to raise kids. You don't really have to worry about, you know, are they going to walk out on the street and get shot, you know? Or are they going to get involved in gangs? You don't have to worry. You don't have to have security alarms on your houses. I mean, that's what I want to teach my kids. That life is back to family and playing outside all day, you know? It's going to take one brave person to move in here. One brave family, black family, to move in here, you know? And you will probably see a lot of houses go for sale.
Whatever our color, home ownership is a powerful force in the American dream. It's more than just a place to live. For most Americans, their home is their single greatest financial investment. And of course, where they live says a lot about what they've achieved.
And it's different when people own property than rent it. Where we were from, no one owned the property. And at times, when I'm walking my dog at night, I see their kids out throwing bottles into the street, just tossing them for no good reason.
They're not concerned with keeping their neighborhood safe so that other people will want to move there and build their homes. But I'm sure that's very different here.
The quiet, the peace, the schools, the fact that I'm no longer renting and throwing away money. It's a whole lot of things combined.
Are you ready? The Willises are making their move at a very good time. They've got a good mortgage, their careers as attorneys are going well, and they're expecting their first child. Are these the people whites don't want moving into their neighborhood? Few whites would say that. And yet people like the Willises are moving in, and whites are moving out. Whites call that self-defense. Blacks call it racism.
They're quick to label you a racist, whether you consciously do it or subconsciously do it, you're a racist. And we're all pretty sensitive to that. Unfortunately, none of that's going to change until they address those real underlying issues that have to do with education and have to do with property values, have to do with crime. You know, if they talk honestly and openly about it, maybe they can stop this white flight or resegregation, as they call it.
Does the presence of black families from the city drag down the schools, increase crime in the suburbs, reduce the value of houses? In a moment, a hard look at some of the worst fears.
Now that we've seen happen in the homes, what about in our schools? When we come back, a tough look into why this is happening, not just in our homes, but in our schools. Please stay with us. Returning to our story, you've seen whites move out of black neighborhoods. You've seen whites move out and blacks move in. We white people call it self-defense, while black people call it racism. Look, we're taught never to judge. We're taught never to judge people by the color of their skin, but by the content of the character. That's what we're taught. And in every community, we need education. We ought to start learning all about what Martin Luther King said. I mean, when the Martin Luther King holiday pops up, before that time, you need to have your kids write a report about what their dream is, what we can learn from it. I mean, if I gotta play the I Have a Dream speech while we do this special, then maybe it would be a good teaching moment for this broadcast. Something we've seen happen in our homes is it also happening in our schools. Again, Tom Brokaw.
If you ask the white residents of Madison and other suburbs where the color is changing, they'll tell you they have good reason to be concerned. If you want to know what can happen, they'll say, come to the Chicago neighborhood called Roseland. This represents their worst fear. Roseland was once white, middle class, and prosperous. Now it's struggling. But who's to blame? The decline that Roseland suffered actually began with white fears that it would happen. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy that happens like this. A few black families with the money to move up buy homes in white neighborhoods. Many white neighbors immediately decide to sell. And with so many homes on the market, prices drop dramatically. But whites will no longer buy them. And too many blacks who will buy those devalued homes can barely afford them. So foreclosures begin. People are put out on the street. More poor families, renters, and transients arrive. With a shrinking tax base, city services become more erratic. Banks and stores leave the community. Organized crime moves in and brings with it a drug business. Many of the white families living in Madison moved from Roseland and similar places that were going through devastating and complicated economic changes. It's still easy today for the decline to be blamed on the people who are moving in, not the families and businesses and money moving out. And it's common for what happened in Roseland to be confused with what's happening in a healthy suburb like Madison, where the blacks arriving are far from poor. Jim and Roseanne Sanderson stayed in Madison while white neighbors all around them left. But now, they too have put their home up for sale. One reason is they started to worry that the town had become simply too black.
We could see it happening, and it started happening at a faster and faster pace.
Why did it make you uncomfortable?
Talking to neighbors, we had people who had come here and who had moved from neighborhoods that had gone all black, and they had had terrible experiences there, had moved here, telling us about it, and is it going to happen again? And it makes everybody very apprehensive.
I think a lot of people who live in this community moved here to get away from the problems in the city. But the problem in the city is coming to the suburbs. And unfortunately, it's probably more black related than it is white.
When you leave Madison and head west, you find white homeowners who recently moved from Madison and other changing suburbs. We asked a group of them what drove them away from their integrated neighborhoods.
Kids were cutting through our yard over a fence, and I yelled at the kids.
And these are all black kids?
Yes, teenage black kids. And I yelled at them to stop going through the fence. I mean, they had to walk down a couple houses. They could have cut through the yards. But they threatened me. They says, I know where you live. I know you have a teenage daughter. We're going to come and get you if you keep bothering us.
There was some strong-arm robberies of kids' coats, kids walking on the street, and carload of kids would stop and, with guns, give us your coats and things like shootings.
Many whites who left Madison, and many of those still here, say blacks are bringing crime to this quiet village of 12,000 residents. We asked the police chief about that.
We'll stack our numbers up against anybody. I think the latest statistics I saw that most communities were running about 8 to 9% violent crime in our communities. We're less than 3%. Our crime rate has stayed pretty stable over the last, I'm going to say, about 22 years. Lincoln Mall was the big intrusion into Madison back in 1973. And anytime you have large commercial establishments, you're going to have additional crime, shoplifting, credit card fraud, check cases, and those kind of things.
The fact is that crime went up, the percentage of the community that was minority increased, and crime increased. Fair or not, that's what happened. Whether it had anything to do with it or not, who knows? I don't think enough was done to find that out.
Our numbers might go up for a couple years period of time, and then they'll drop again. Last year we had a drop in our crime rate. So there's no correlation, as far as I'm concerned, between the increase in the black population and crime in the village of Madison.
Is it a black problem? All I can say is, there again, it's what the media tells us, what we read in the papers. We haven't had any direct confrontation, but for example, black gangs.
How do I sell my home to someone who comes in and says, by the way, what's the problem around here with gangs and this and that?
Well, again, I think it's the stereotypes. I mean, it's amazing. One of the things that myself and one of the commanders has to do so much is rumor control. You hear so many different things that have occurred at the mall in the last 20 years. I mean, if you were to believe everything that you heard, there's rapes there every day, people are getting shot at all the time, young white women are being sold for slavery out of the mall, and this stuff doesn't happen. You get a whole lot more house for your money.
The police chief has the figures to show his town is not a dangerous place. He'll gladly give tours for real estate agents or anyone else he believes has the power to change perceptions.
It's a very, very unique area. The homes are absolutely gorgeous.
But crime is only one of the concerns of those whites leaving Madison. Money is another. Most people have a sizable portion of their savings tied up in their homes. Paul Finkston, who had lived in Madison 7 years when he sold out and left, said he made a good profit on his home. But if he had waited until Madison became even more black, he says, he probably would have had to sell for less.
In fact, the property values did drop. No question they did. You can look it up, and you really can't dispute that they did.
We heard this a lot, but we could find no evidence that the price of houses in Madison has fluctuated any more than those of most other Chicago suburbs. In fact, one real estate survey shows home values in the village went up an average 32% between 1990 and 1995. Aside from the perceptions that crime is rising and home prices are falling, the most frequent reason whites give for leaving Madison is that they had to do it for the sake of their kids.
One of the big concerns that I had about the community was the education and the decline in the quality of the education that our students were receiving. The schools were not performing. My kids were not getting the quality education which they deserved, and I had a right to demand. And the choice was to spend the money for a private education or to move to a community that had better performance.
We visited one of the schools many whites want to avoid, Ridge Central High. It serves most of Madison. Student leaders choose the music that plays as class changes. Hallways are spotless. However, as the number of black faces has increased every year, more and more white families have pulled their children out.
It looks different, so now people think it's different, but I'm telling you it's not.
Make sure you're down there. I'll be there.
Vaughn Mansfield has been principal for 4 years. He says he knows that some parents worry whether their kids can get a good education in a school that is 80% black.
When the ratios changed, people felt that the school, the quality, the things that were once offered were no longer intact. I think some people may have even been in fear of their own safety to walk through the halls of the school. Those are the people who have never walked through the building. But you won't see gangs, you won't see graffiti all over the place, you won't see a building that's falling down, you won't see students who are not interested in learning.
When we first moved there, the schools were outstanding, but about the last 2 or 3 years there, we noticed a big drop in the educational quality.
In what way? Scores?
Well, scores were never that great anyway. They were probably state average. But like my daughter graduated 27th in her class, and she struggled the first 2 years at Iowa. How much did she really learn? I don't know, I think my wife would agree with me too, that the last few years we were there, we thought that the schools were declining a bit.
Because there were more blacks?
Could be. It could be.
Are there problems with decline in school? Yes, there are problems with decline in school in most communities. There are problems with gangs in our community. Yes, and there are problems with gangs in every other community. Let's not make the connection between African Americans coming into this community and those things. You look at the rise of African Americans in a community, and you then make the causal connection that isn't there, isn't proved by any factual, any statistics, any kind of research that supports that. That's more of the perpetuation of the myth.
Darkness covered over everything.
If many of the most caring white families and black families withdraw from the schools, they can cause yet another self-fulfilling prophecy.
That's America. Sometimes perhaps you don't want to be a part of me.
As white students leave and more black students are brought in to fill their seats, there is a fear they won't be like these students, that instead the next wave will fit the worst image of the ghetto kid, the stereotype that colors all blacks.
It's just that they're coming from a different background, a different mix of values, and education is not one of the things that is a top priority. Certainly black students can perform as well as white students.
They seldom get that kind of credit where people will say, they'll say, if you get blacks in school, there goes to school, right?
That's right.
Alors c'est très bien, je vais vous rendre vos examens. I'm going to return your quizzes. You did very, very well.
When you measure the performance of a school like Ridge Central during a decade of racial change, the important comparison is between past and present. And so far, there is no evidence that academic standards are lower or that students are achieving less now that Ridge Central is 80% black than they were when the school was predominantly white. Some of the black parents told us the departure of so many whites from the high school reveals the real problem that most of us won't admit. Whites just don't like the idea of becoming a minority in their school, their community, or anywhere.
If it continues to become more and more black, does that bother you?
Probably would. I don't know. I think it would probably bother a lot of people. I don't know if...
Why?
Well, because I don't think that it's good from a community standpoint. It just is much better that if it would remain racially stable. If I was going to continue to live here, Would I be that one person? Probably not.
You'd leave.
Well, at some point.
White assumptions about blacks are deeply ingrained. Here's a familiar example. The sight of white teenagers hanging out is not nearly as suspicious or as threatening as black teenagers doing exactly the same thing.
The teenagers, you know, frequently they meet in much larger groups, which becomes a very intimidating factor. And, you know, at the
But if you
Lincoln,
went to the mall and you saw a group of black teenagers at one end of the mall, you'd have one reaction.
right.
Than you would if you saw a group of white teenagers at the other end of the
I would, mainly because there'll be more of them generally, and they'll be louder.
Like if you went up to the convenience store, it was kind of a scary experience. I didn't feel comfortable getting out of my car and going in.
We went with Sally Formas to a convenience store in Madison. Most of the shoppers we saw were black. That was true also in the big shopping center, Lincoln Mall, in the heart of Madison's middle-class neighborhoods.
I don't feel safe to come here anymore.
Why?
Because of the clientele. I don't feel safe in the parking lot here.
Did you ever get hassled here? And
No.
Did you ever have any bad experiences?
No.
Do you know anyone for a fact who did have any bad experiences?
No, I did not.
You know, we keep hearing all these rumors about crime here, crime in Madison going up because more black people have moved in, real estate values have gone down, schools are terrible. We went back and checked all of that very carefully. Crime really hasn't changed significantly. Real estate values, in fact, have not only stayed steady, but they've gone up some. And the school records are really about what they are in other places. Does that surprise you?
No. It's just from what I see when I come here.
It's just a comfort level for you.
Right. My husband and I came here to get some eyeglasses, and we wanted to leave as quickly as possible.
But there was nothing that really happened to you.
Nothing happened. No, nothing happened to us at all.
How do we get beyond that, Sally? That, you know, that you just don't feel comfortable and there's no physical act or you're not intimidated in any way physically, no one hassles you in some fashion.
I don't know. I think, I don't know how you do that. I mean, it's just a fact of life, and unfortunately, I think a lot of people just move, and they keep moving away from it. You know, they know it's here, and they don't want to live around it, so they move away. You know, somewhere else where it's not going to happen for a few more years.
So, new all-white neighborhoods are being created partly as a refuge from a decline that has not yet happened on the streets and in the schools. But perhaps there is more to it than that. Other worries about what is happening back in Madison. Segregation often grows out of fears that we don't want to talk about.
And we are going to talk about that when we return. When we return, a look at how blacks and whites can mix. How to find out how to we educate communities on how to get along. Please stay with us. Blacks and whites not mixing together. It's something that we've all seen in history. You know, when you hear Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. saying, "I had a dream," that dream was all about seeing blacks and whites mixed together. We're not going back to the 1960s, but it is still happening in the suburb cities that you live in. Probably in Chicago, in Illinois, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But the question is, can blacks and whites really mix together? Or they're going to have a plan B, which is moving out. Once again, here's Tom Brokaw.
We are determined to end the kind of discrimination that has existed in housing all these years.
Blacks have a history of trying to move into Chicago's white neighborhoods. Whites responded with rocks and bottles in the late 1960s when Dr. Martin Luther King tried to stage marches in favor of open housing. 3 decades later, the battle is over. By law, anyone can live in any neighborhood he or she can afford. Yet, the map looks like this. If you color the suburb south of Chicago, the division is dramatic and unmistakable. Blacks, who are about 20% of the population of the metropolitan area, are grouped together almost as tightly in the suburbs as they were in the city when Dr. King was marching. We're back to the question, why?
Because we hear horror stories. You know, blacks do read. Blacks do listen to the news. Who wants to be the first to get a cross burned in their home?
This is not an old headline, and just last year, in the mostly white suburb of Oak Forest, a black congregation announced plans to buy an abandoned white church. Someone has twice used the walls of the church to send a message. These, of course, are not the sentiments of the majority of whites, but most blacks find them threatening. And suddenly, the towns that already are fully integrated look all the better.
Oh, fine. It's fine. I'll do that. You guys over still in
Madison is only 5 miles from Oak Forest, but it's on the other side of that imaginary line that separates the towns where blacks feel welcome from the ones where they do not. When you try to understand the underlying fears that drive whites out of communities that are becoming more and more black, you inevitably come across the concerns in both races that their children will get to know each other too well.
How much do you think there is concern about interracial dating? Do you think that's a problem, Rose?
Yes. I think it is politically correct to say no, it's not an issue anymore, but I think it is. And I think that's going to take a very long time to change.
Would it bother you if your daughter came home with a white boyfriend?
Probably. Probably.
And if your son?
Probably.
Same thing. And you think it helps drive what they call white flight?
I do. I definitely do. Because it follows that they're mixing, they're going to school together, they're doing, things kids do together. They're going to date. They're going to, it's going to continue.
Is there a fear about dating between racial groups, do you think?
I don't think anybody talks about it.
I know they don't talk about it. You think that's part of the unspoken fear, Reggie? How would you feel if your 15-year-old son just got wildly smitten by a 15-year-old white girl?
You do ask the tough questions. How would I feel? I love my son unconditionally, and that would not change. I guess if the young lady was the kind of young lady...
Smashing young girl.
Yeah, all of them, okay. It's his choice. It's his choice, and I would support him in his choice.
Because you sound a little uncomfortable.
Well, it requires really more than just a cerebral response. I mean, I really have to get into really dealing with the feelings I might have around that. And so,
what would be the reservations that you'd have?
Because I would have concerns about the reality in which my African American son lives in this world. We don't live in a colorblind society where you choose the people you date irrespective of their color, and there's no consequence to that. There is potential consequence for him going to a movie with a white girl, or going to a different neighborhood, or just progressing in a dating relationship. And so I would be concerned about what those consequences could be.
Even when the best and brightest kids get together, there still is tension over race. Not necessarily from the kids, but almost always from the parents. There are many people not comfortable with scenes like this, no matter who the kids are. But the couple throwing this party for a group of high school students is not concerned by the racial mix. Mary Hawes is a speech pathologist at Rich Central High, and her husband Ray Hawes is a business management consultant. The Hawes met in college. They've been happily married for 26 years. They're raising 3 successful children. Their middle child, Emily, was valedictorian of her high school graduating class. The Hawes live in one of Madison's predominantly black neighborhoods. Mary Hawes has the rare perspective of living in 2 worlds.
The perception is that anything that's more black than white isn't as good. Now that may or may not be true, but people buy into the perception, and whether it's a housing development or the high school, we knew before we had kids that even though our kids would be racially mixed, the world would perceive them as being black. We also, every time we sell a house, we learned that the first thing we have to go do is go through and take down all of our family pictures. I boxed them all up for a couple of months because we had an open house in California and people came in to see the house and they spent so much time making rude comments about our family pictures that's the first thing we do. We wash the walls, we clean the oven, we take down the pictures and hide them.
But we tend to think of ourselves as being really a typical American family, typical American suburban family. And we don't see ourselves in any other way. How other people view us, I mean, I really don't think that much about it.
Everyone around here, we look out for each other. And I kind of like the racial balance because I would like for my son to grow up seeing how it is. I don't want him to be sheltered from one type of life. I want him to experience all types and all works and walks and aspects of life. You have a lot of black families moving out into the south suburbs because they have the same type of philosophy that I have. They want to do better for their children. They want a base for their children to start off with.
My family has encouraged me to strive for great heights and pick myself up when I've fallen short. For the last 4 years, they've fostered my development as both a student and a human being. My mother has known when to wipe away tears and when simply to let me cry. And my father has congratulated me on my strengths, as well as my ability to recognize my weaknesses. These few words cannot express the gratitude I possess for having been blessed by God with this wonderful family. Good, decent people. I thank them.
Ray Hawes was offered a job transfer to Minneapolis, so he and Mary put their home up for sale. No white prospects ever looked at this house. After more than a year of the village's advertising campaign, only a few whites have moved in and a few dozen more have left. Madison still is known as a town changing color in a country where color counts. In a moment, how long should the last white person stay?
How long should that white person be able to stay put in that place? When we come back, how long do whites and blacks really mix together? How well do they do? Tom Brokaw has the conclusion to our story when we return. Please stay with us. Now the conclusion to our story. We've seen how blacks and whites can mix in segregated cities, like in Chicago. Chicago is one of the biggest cities in every community that needs to work on learning how to get along and learning how to mix. But does that mean that they can, just because they mix, does that mean that they can stay together along forever? Well, you be the judge. Again, Tom Brokaw.
The ancestors of most black Americans were the only immigrants brought here against their will. The incredible journey of their descendants in this country is not yet finished. In their latest migration, we don't yet know what will be the outcome of the black middle-class move into suburbs like Madison and others around the country. We do know that here a lot of well-meaning people of both colors are trying to avoid separation as usual. But not far away is another suburb that changed. The decline that happened here has not happened in Madison. Businesses that left Madison have been replaced by others, and the average income of the families moving in has stayed high. But the threat is unmistakable in Madison.
What do you think this community is going to be like in 10 years?
My own gut opinion, it'll be a predominantly black community.
It'll be an all-black community.
All black community.
It'll be an all-black community.
So you move now, and you end up in a new neighborhood, and you find a house that you like, and across the street you've got this guy who's a major jerk, and he happens to be white.
Yeah.
And you've given up your black friend for your own neighborhood.
That's right.
It's a good possibility.
It's not going to make us happy. Not going to make us happy, and it is a possibility.
If I could wave my magic wand and we all could just get along, that would be great. But if Caucasian Americans choose not to be my neighbor, we've got openings for people to come here who want to be my neighbor, and that's okay. I think that those who leave this village because they're concerned that African Americans are moving in, I think that it's their right to do that, and God bless them. And I think it may be their loss.
Most blacks would agree with Reggie Richardson that an all-black suburb can be just as livable as an all-white suburb if the will and the money are there. But no suburb of significant size outside a major city has prospered after turning all-black. Black middle class, although growing rapidly, still is not large enough to support many towns like Madison. Not without the people who left.
In my lifetime, I've only seen it deteriorate. Like I said, I grew up in Chicago. I've watched Chicago deteriorate. I moved out to the south suburbs here. I'm watching them deteriorate.
Where do you go to avoid this? I mean, you want to go where your house is going to go up in value, make money, it's an investment. No, but it's like, it's hard.
The people that were left behind, as it were, in Madison, that had all the same values and the best intentions and wanted a safe place for their children, now they've been left behind. What advice would you have for them?
I don't know. Sorry, I can't answer. I don't know.
It's tough though, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Do you think about it?
Occasionally. One of our next door neighbor, after we moved, refused to talk to us.
He was angry.
Oh, extremely. He hasn't returned phone calls or Christmas cards or.
How'd that make you feel?
Upset. It hurt.
I don't know. It's really frustrating. It's I'm sure I'll go to my grave. God, and I hate to sound that pessimistic, but I'll go to my grave not having seen a real improvement in race relations. Jeez, and that's scary. I even hate to say that.
But it's kind of hard and bitter that when you think you have reached a plateau and you've achieved something, you're still not accepted, no matter what.
It's a monumental task that we've undertaken here in this community, and we may succeed and we may not. But I am proud of the fact that we've at least tried.
In this town that is changing colors, it's important to remember that half the whites still are here. It's safe to say that a large portion of them are here because they want to be. Other towns are watching to see if these folks can find a way to live together, black and white, in the same neighborhoods. There still may be time before the last door closes.
So, now that we've seen all that, what can we learn from this experience? I'll have the answer when we come back. Welcome back. We just finished watching the Tom Brokaw report all about why blacks and whites can't mix together. Now, you may have your mixed opinions all about, this, that, and the third happening. But here's what before I want to give you my 2 cents. Everybody in the comment section was like, Black lives and all lives matter. It doesn't seem to be very important in the neighborhoods. They move. They move in. Neighbors move out. It's just basically the whites move out, the blacks move in. Racist. I mean, it's like, oh my God. I mean, I'm not going to go on a case scenario, but you know what I mean. It's like, oh my God. It's like Scooby-Doo. It's like, it's like an episode of Scooby. It's like the ghost is African American and Scooby-Doo is white. Now, that's a terrible example here. But you probably get the picture here. You're going to try and change human nature. How's that working for you? We have to educate our communities. We have to teach people that blacks and whites can mix. We have to teach kids all about what happened. I mean, if you remember the show, Everybody Hates Chris. Chris was the only black person in school and in class. Well, when he went to high school, there were a lot of black people. So what does that tell you, boys and girls? We have to learn to get along with each other, no matter what. Whether we're black, white, Mexican, Latino, Asian, Indian. It doesn't matter. We have to learn to get along every day. And if a black neighbor moves in, what do? We meet them. We greet them. And we raise some common sense. What does that tell you? You need to learn to get along. No ifs, no ands, no buts about it. Hey, look, I get it, Everybody Chicago's like one of the worst cities ever to live in. Texas is like one of the best places to live in because we learn to get along with each other, whether we're black or white. Whether you're black or white, it doesn't matter. You have to get along with your neighbors. No ifs, no ands, no buts about it. Look, I get where we're all coming from here. The thing that we all have to understand here is this. Blacks and whites do mix. And in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., we should not be judging people by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. We have to learn to get along. Period. No ifs, ands, buts, or excuses. If you are white and a black neighborhood and a black person moves in, you are to greet them. You are to welcome them in. You are to not be scared of them. If your child has never seen a black person before, introduce them. Teach them. Make it a teaching moment. And if you decide to make it a teaching moment for your child will understand all about why blacks and whites do mix together. And if you gotta watch this program to help you out, okay. Not just this program, but the Why Can't We Live Together program. It's to really help you out and understand. Okay. Finally tonight, actually, you know what? Well, I've said, I probably said way too much here, so with this piece of good news, we're just going to wrap it up here. So, with that in mind, talk about here, what I want to do before we wrap it up here is just point out some things. I was not racist the whole time. You may find some racism, and if I was racist, I am very sorry. This is a teaching moment, not to be. This episode is all about is a teaching moment for everybody, for every black, for everybody, every ethnicity ever. Not just black and whites, but for every culture, African culture, Indian culture, Mexican culture, Asian culture, Chinese culture, every culture here in this world. To learn we can mix, whether we're black, whether we're white, whether we're Asian, whether we're Chinese, we can learn to mix, match, and get along. If we're neighbors, we greet them, we meet them, and we learn about their cultures. And it'd be a great thing for your child to understand. If you can teach your child how to get along with a different person, maybe then friendships can grow. And even once friendships can grow, it can even lead to them getting married, having children, and them trying to understand why we can be together and live together wherever we live. That's giving me a break for this Friday going to Saturday. We'll probably be off on Saturday, so if I'm off on Saturday, I'll see you again for Game Break Monday. For all of us here at YouTube, man, give me a break. Stop bullying, speak up. Concentration, not strength. No jaywalking. Good night.